and women globally through traveling art exhibitions, speaker series, and conferences. The aim of these activities is to close gaps in understanding and to bring attention to the fundamental role of women in that region as the pillars of building peace and creating safer environment for their families and communities of the present and the future. We hope that sharing their stories will bring more attention to their presence and their needs, helping them to emerge into the mainstream of global opportunity with the chance to increase their involvement in creating stability and prosperity worldwide. We believe we can reach these aims through the hard work and support of many fantastic organizations and individuals who have dedicated their lives to helping people in need. These organizations and individuals have shown us how to make our lives more meaningful. The objective of this panel is to organize a strong campaign regarding one of the most important issues in the world today, the impact of war on women and children. While more men are directly killed, injured, and harmed in the situation of war, women and girls are killed, sexually attacked, and humiliated because of gender. They have to care for family during wartime, and they may face displacement and separation from loved ones. Children may become victims of prostitution. They are also killed and maimed and recruited to act as soldiers themselves. Their education is disrupted, and they become gravely ill from the direct physical effect of war. According to the United Nations Population Fund, despite many international agreements affirming the human rights, women are still much more likely than men to be poor and illiterate. They usually have less access than men to medical care, property ownership, credit training, and employment. They are far less likely than men to be politically active and far more likely to be victim of domestic violence. Census Cultural is honored to be part of this effort through help and dedications of works of number of professional team of friends and scholars. We have privilege by participation of world-known humanitarian and environmental activists who have accepted our organizational invitation in a most humble manner. As Executive Director of Census Cultural, I truly appreciate the dedication of close friends and friends of friends who have helped to support this cause, many of them on short notice. We believe we can reach each aims through the hard work and support of many fantastic organizations and individuals who have dedicated their lives to bring help to people. The organization and individuals have shown us how to make our lives more meaningful. I would ask my daughter, Shokrani. I would love to bring a short introduction for her. Shokrani is our nonprofit specialist and part of advisory board member who happens to be my daughter. She has served as a co-founder of Census Magazine and has been involved in nonprofit management, working with organizations such as Women Initiative for Self-Employment and most recently, Future Without Violence, a national nonprofit based in the Presidio of San Francisco. Please welcome her.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tata Monfared. I am proud to announce our panelists today. I would like to introduce Ms. Mary Crawley, our panel moderator during this event. Ms. Crawley's fantastic work profile will be a powerful add to the combination of our great speakers of humanitarian and environmental scholars and advocates. Ms. Mary Crawley is part of a group of founders for Ocean Voyages Institute, a nonprofit organization based in Sausalito, California. It was established in 1979 with a mission focused on preservation of maritime arts and sciences, the ocean environment, and island culture. Welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Karen Koning Abu Zaid. She has been a champion for humanity and diplomatic causes for over 30 years, serving with the United Nations. She worked for UNHCR for 19 years in Sudan, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, Geneva, then running the South Africa, Kenya, and Somalia programs as chef de cabinet. From 2000 to 2005, she served Palestinian refugees in Gaza as Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Commissioner General, and then as Under-Secretary General and Commissioner General until 2010. In 2011, she left her career and continued to champion human rights causes, diplomatic issues. Along with her MA in Islamic Studies from McGill University, she also was awarded honorary doctorate and medal for public service from her alma mater, which from Latin is also a perfect name for her, Nourishing Mother. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last, I would like to, last but not least, of course, I would like to introduce Mujgan Safavi Isfani. She is a native of Iran and an environmental toxicologist. Dr. Safavi Isfani is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She's the author of over 24 peer-reviewed articles and book entitled Pollution and Reproductive Damage, Pollution-Induced Cell Death and Reproductive Damage in Fish and Mammals. She also has published on effects of plasticizers and pesticides on female reproductive cycles. Wars and invasion in the Middle East has turned her attention to the effects of war pollutants on the public health in areas now experiencing environmental crisis. Welcome, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and it's a pleasure to be here. And Karen is going to start speaking first, and then we'll have a wonderful slide presentation and speech by Mosta. And then we'll be having lots of good questions and discussions. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank Census Cultural very much for inviting us and inviting me to speak on these issues, and thank you all for being here as well. I'm going to focus this afternoon on two groups of women in the Middle East, the Palestinian and the Syrian refugees. They're the groups that I currently know most about, and they're also those who are in the most egregious situations, although with other non-refugees, that is, internally displaced persons, who are following not far behind, today in Iraq, still in Darfur, most likely in Libya, and others in countries that are neighboring Syria. You may have seen the headline last week that quoting the High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, saying that refugees plus IDPs and asylum seeker numbers had surpassed 50 million for the first time since World War II. 51.2 million persons without including the 5.3 million Palestine refugees who are assisted by UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. I think it's easy to appreciate that in most cases to be a refugee imposes additional burdens that even poor, marginalized, or mistreated citizens do not bear. To be forced to leave one's home, usually with little but the clothes on one's back, to be longing always to return home, to have to depend on the international community, which is generous but never generous enough, for your basic needs, to have to rely on the people and a government, not your own, for the basic rights to live, to settle, to make even the most modest provisions for one's family, are all challenges that most of us are fortunate not to have to endure. From 2000 to 2010, I lived in Gaza, first as deputy, as you heard, and then as Commissioner General of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. So I had an opportunity to feel, from an admittedly privileged position of freedom of movement, the added deprivation accorded to Palestine refugees of living under occupation. It did not take long to understand how numbing an experience it is to have every movement of persons and goods overseen by a hostile body, to have to accept control over what kind and how much water, electricity, foodstuffs must be allowed you and your family, and when you could not only leave or return to your tiny enclave for health, education, or professional reasons with somebody else's permission. Since 2011, I've been a commissioner on the United Nations Human Rights Council's mandated Commission of Inquiry on Syria, investigating and reporting on human rights violations and abuses on all sides of the conflict, regularly visiting the refugee camps in Jordan, Syria, not in Syria, we're not allowed in there, no visas are allowed us, to in Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq, and communicating with those inside Syria by other means. In our 12 reports so far, we've detailed the horrors of war on men, women, and children, and the indignities and deprivations of living as refugees. Now, you can find all of these reports, they're public reports, on the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights website, and they're labeled COI.Syria. Since we're here to speak about women in conflict, I'll not attempt to make direct comparisons between the experiences of the Palestine women refugees and Syrian women refugees, since there are obvious, significant differences between groups in exile for more than 6 decades and those who left their country no more than 3 years ago, although both are equally devastating. Hence, I shall approach each group separately, but first I wish to draw a picture of similarities between them, particularly between the actions and reactions of the women facing these conflicts, overwhelming as they have been and continue to be. Before I describe the horrors of war, which are many for Palestinian and Syrian women and men, I wish to emphasize the strengths and the resilience of these women and consequently their children. We in the humanitarian world are always keen to draw attention to these admirable and often ignored characteristics, to demonstrate that women are a positive, binding force for their families and with their neighbors, and the reason that societies maintain their cultures and beliefs and quite simply endure despite unimaginable and long persistent suffering. And I'll draw attention to a few home truths about refugees. Everywhere, refugees do their best to ensure that life continues as close to normal as possible, granted under often impossible circumstances, particularly for their children. Therefore, education becomes a preoccupation for the family, and especially the mother. Everything will be sacrificed to make it possible for the children to go to school, to get an education, to be able to find a job, whatever is necessary to secure a better future. Let me illustrate this truth among Palestinian refugees, those who since 1948 continue to live in exile, longing for their homeland and for an independent state. Their conditions vary in the main countries of asylum, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the occupied Palestinian territory of West Bank and Gaza, and are partially alleviated compared to other refugees, both more recent as Syrians or more neglected as the Somalis, for example, by the services provided by UNRWA. Basic public services, education, health, income generation are available, and the Palestine refugee issues receive regular attention among international actors. One might consider, in fact, the UNRWA factor working against more appropriate or more radical change. As in so many cases, including in recent refugee outflows, the world's conscience is salved by monetary contributions to UN agencies and to NGOs, who then bear the responsibility for looking after the problem. The root cause of the displacement is put aside, and the refugees are expected to, or assumed to be, satisfied, to give up their yearning for citizenship and independence, and to forget about fighting for the right to return to their original homes, the right enjoyed, at least theoretically, by all refugees. It's the mothers and grandmothers, the sisters and aunts, who keep the flame alive, who decorate the walls of their dwellings with the keys of the houses they were forced to flee in 1948. It's the women who, despite poverty and political and other obstacles, who insist on getting the children to school, pushing them to higher and higher levels of education, and letting them go when opportunities arise to move abroad or to pursue a dream. One of my earliest experiences in Gaza was attending a virtual graduation of the engineering students from Gaza at Birzeit University in the West Bank. Virtual because the students were not given permission by the Israeli authorities to travel home, the Second Intifada having erupted after they'd gone off for their studies. and the families were not permitted to travel out of Gaza to go to the graduation. From each family there in Gaza, the grandmother, the mother, and sometimes the aunt and sister took the microphone to address their sons or daughters, to congratulate them, but with the additional wish, each one of them said, carry on, inshallah, to get a master's degree and a doctorate degree. And there were many tears, including my own, and I didn't know anybody there yet, but mostly tears of pride and joy. Another telling memory is from the Second Intifada in Gaza, when whole neighborhoods were attacked and bulldozed, allegedly to punish a single protester from one home. Arriving at the scene to see what we might do to counter the terrible destruction, we always found the women, particularly the grandmothers, sifting through the rubble, trying to rescue whatever they might find, whatever might still be intact from the family's treasures, photos, or simply the documents that could be vital to prove who you were and what you had accomplished. My narrative could go on, but I hope these few anecdotes about how ordinary female refugees are coping conveys a message about the strength and the pride of Palestinian women, determined in large part by the interests of their children, their families, and their futures. Let me turn now to the more immediate and therefore much more violent situation of refugee and internally displaced women of Syria. Here the story is much grimmer, though just as admirable, sometimes unbelievably so, as among other refugees with respect to dealing with their suffering and that of their families. This is a defining feature of Focus on Women. Their decisions, their emotions, their actions are concentrated on their children or on their parents, even on their neighbors, less than on the loftier issues of the government, the country, the state. As with all victims, though, they will rail against the oppressor, but more specifically because of what is being done to the people nearest and dearest to them. The Commission of Inquiry on Syria has conducted 3,000 interviews. We have a team of 20 investigators out in the field all the time. Most of these among Syrians in refugee camps. We've made use of materials gathered by other professionals, organizations, journalists, and we can corroborate the information ourselves. We've recently come into possession of a certified copy of the thousands of photographs of victims of torture and starvation in government detention centers. We've documented in detail war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by both the government and the opposition. Before addressing the women of Syria, I believe we should acknowledge that the vast majority of casualties in Syria since 2011 have been men. The vast majority of those detained, starved, and tortured in government prisons are men. And almost all of those who are captured and killed by the opposition forces are men. Men have paid a heavy price in this conflict with their lives. Women, however, have been attacked in ways that will not surprise those of you who are familiar with what happens in the midst of war. Women have been particularly vulnerable at checkpoints, which are many in Syria, and when they are detained. Rape has been used as a weapon of war by the government forces and their militia, and women have been abused and misused by some of the more extreme of the opposition groups. It's women who are wounded and killed when the bread lines in which they're standing are shelled. It's the women trying to protect their children from indiscriminate barrel bombs being dropped on their neighborhoods, who expose themselves at home or as they escort their children to school. It's women who must care for their injured children and for their family members who are hungry and ill when medical personnel and facilities are no longer available. It's the women, once again, who've held things together, both inside Syria and outside in the refugee camps. In many places, the women are left with their families as the men are detained or go off to fight. Women face the worst effects of the medieval sieges that have been imposed on more than 250,000 Syrian refugees, Syrian internally displaced persons, foraging for grasses and crafting meals of weeds and water for crying children and starving family members, feeding always others before themselves. Women expose themselves to detention and mistreatment from opposing sides in the conflict as they try to smuggle bread or medicines through checkpoints, or as they approach detention centers or military posts to ask for information about their missing fathers, husbands, and brothers. Too many have become widows as the death toll surpasses 160,000 people by most accounts. Many others have been the ones to guide their families on harrowing journeys through hostile territory, facing great difficulties to cross checkpoints and borders, seeking a measure of safety, and if they're fortunate, some assistance. Once a refugee, almost always accompanied by several children, the mother must learn to make the best of camp conditions, which vary widely in the asylum countries. Turkey, for example, has established well-run camps for over 800,000 refugees, with a level of services rarely seen anywhere in the world. But the refugees, particularly the men, are confined to the camps, able to leave only when permission is granted, and that is often only to the women. Jordan's large camps, 600,000 in one camp, offer basic food, education, and health services to 600,000 refugees altogether, that are the services that are usually provided by UNHCR. Only with a Jordanian sponsor is a refugee allowed to leave the camp, and there are no formal camps in Lebanon, where over 1 million refugees, equal to 1/4 of the Lebanese population, make do as best they can on their own, assisted minimally when they can reach them via UNHCR or the NGOs. Another 220,000 Kurd refugees have found a welcome in the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq, where they've been able to find jobs and put their children in schools, although still living in refugee camps. Palestine refugees from Syria are in the worst position when it comes to seeking refuge, since they're unwelcome in the neighboring countries, all of which have put restrictions on their entry. Inside Syria, those in the Yarmouk camp have been caught in the fighting between government and opposition groups, keeping 21,000 Palestinians under siege in that camp since July of 2013, until a truce was announced just this past week. But as of yesterday, no aid has reached them. UNRWA has not been able to get anyone in, despite the fact that there's a truce. The government hasn't given permission. I cannot fail to speak about some of the worst consequences of the war among refugee children, those of forced marriage and forced labor. Even when there are opportunities for education, and despite what I've said about how important it is for all refugee families, young boys may not be able to take advantage of these opportunities, as they're often the ones that have to go out and seek out menial and very demanding jobs to support their families. For young girls, a more despicable practice has been accepting monetary offers from men who come scouting the camps or refugee settlement areas for brides. The marriages are usually brief, leaving the girls with a very bleak future and the family in a situation worse than ever before. While dwelling on the ravages of conflict and conveying the horrors inflicted upon non-combatants, as well as the difficulties that follow war victims as refugees, I hope I've also demonstrated the strength, courage, and resilience of the women who continue to take responsibility for protecting their families and manage to shield their children and their elders from giving up on a better and brighter future beyond what faces them at present. I thank you again for inviting me, and I'm very much happy to have the opportunity to share these thoughts with all of you, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So basically, it is no surprise that after a major environmental disruption like war, that you would see rises in birth defects and cancers. Epidemics are common after a war. Once you bomb a place, you would expect that you will see major catastrophes, such as the ones we see in Iraq right now. We've seen the same thing in Japan, in Vietnam, in Philippines, in Korea, you name it. There is not one place that we have unleashed this machine of war on them, and you haven't seen major catastrophes like birth defects and cancers in the world. Historically, as scientists, we know that it happens. So why is it that we keep doing it? That's hopefully what we can discuss later. Okay, let's go back now. I skipped one slide. So what are some of the core sources of environmental pollution? Of course, bullets and bombs and military bases. Military bases are one of the highest polluters of the environment globally. There are a number of them across Iraq, and we will get to talk about them later. And also what are called open-air burn pits. This phenomenon has been very big in Iraq, and I will talk about it and what they are in a few minutes. But the question is, how much bomb was dropped on Iraq? We don't know. We can't put a tonnage on it. But there is a report, as you can see, a UNEP report, that says about 1,000 to 2,000 tons of depleted uranium was dropped on Iraq. This is a huge amount. And everybody knows that depleted uranium is radioactive. It's poisonous. And in fact, it is not meant to be dropped on people. So there is other news about it, but I will skip it. So this is an estimate of how much bomb was dropped on Iraq. So this is a picture of Baghdad, the night that they started bombing it. It's another devastating photograph, but the point is that you see the smoke coming out of these buildings. These buildings and this smoke is highly toxic. It contains all kinds of very, very stable pollutants that do not break down in the environment. They stay very toxic, and they continue to expose people. Gets into the water, into the food. You can touch it, and you can inhale it. So these toxins are persistent. They stay, and even after the bombing is over, it's in the soil, it's in the air, it's in the food. They continue to expose people from inside and get people sick. Now, we all know, well, I don't know about you guys, but people who have lived in the south of Iran, for example, which has a very similar climate to Iraq, you know that the area is prone to lots of storms and wind that re-injects this dust from settled in the earth, re-injects it into the air, and people continue to breathe it in. So this is a very important thing in terms of people's exposure to war pollutants, because the area itself is very prone to dust storms, and this gets re-injected into the air. People keep inhaling it. So for children and pregnant women and growing fetuses, exposure to these toxic compounds is much more harmful than it is for an adult person, simply because they have not their metabolic system is such that it makes them more sensitive to exposure. And the main source of being exposed to health toxic stuff is inhalation. And children, obviously, we know they breathe in a lot more air than adults because of their size, therefore being quite a bit more sensitive to exposure. So what are these open-air burn pits, which are a major source of environmental pollution in Iraq today? If you have followed the media in the past several years, you know that there is a big story about it. These are areas where waste has been burnt on U.S. military bases starting from 2003 to 2010. Apparently in very large areas. Some reports say that many of these burn pits are as large as 10 acres wide. Now imagine a U.S. Football field is about an acre, 10 of those burning continuously 24/7 next to your house and emitting these toxic fumes. And imagine if you're pregnant, or if a child is a year or 2 years old. It's quite a terrible picture. But a lot of soldiers, American soldiers, have been exposed to these fumes, and they have come to the United States with all kinds of ailments, and they have been fighting to get compensated for their physical harm. And really recently, they have made some gains. So let me tell you about that and how it's important to link the exposure of American soldiers to exposure of Iraqi population, and hopefully see if we can find a way to help the population. This is a picture that shows you location of U.S. military bases in Iraq, and not all of them. At the height of U.S. invasion, there was 500 military bases in Iraq, all across Iraq. This is only about 100 of them. What you can see is Basra, Fallujah, and Hawija, also Baghdad and Turkey, of course. But what you can see is a whole lot of these military bases encircling big cities that are quite populated. So what it tells you is that the population in these cities not only they were exposed to bombings and bullets and pollution from those, but also they are encircled by these military bases that are emitting pollutants from these burn pits continuously for a straight 7 years. And they would have been exposed to a combination of these things, quite harmful to the health of a mother and a child. This is a picture of one of these burn pits in Iraq. Okay, I skipped one, but anyway, a few of these pictures that tells you how enormously big they are and constantly burning. It's quite harmful. And they are illegal. By 2010, the United States government made them illegal, and they haven't been able to burn them. The people in charge of these burn pits were none but Halliburton and BKR, which are two military contractors. And I guess you all know that Halliburton made close to $40 billion out of the war in Iraq. So what has happened is that a lot of American soldiers have gotten sick. They have come back home. They have been fighting for their right to, first of all, feel better, also be compensated for the damage that was done to their health. By 2012, there was a study by Institute of Medicine where this link was actually made. They said, yes, exposure to burn pit exhaust would cause a disease, and the link was made. Cumulative exposure to mixtures of chemicals by inhalation would cause health damages. Now, you have to realize why this is quite important, because many American soldiers were exposed to toxic stuff in Vietnam. There was never an acknowledgement of that. To this day, they are suffering from cancers and complicated health situation. Nobody has admitted that it has to do with their serving in Vietnam. Not now. Right now, the United States there is a documentation that says that, yes, sickness can be attributed to exposure to burn pit exhaust. People of Iraq, especially children and women and pregnant mothers and fetuses, they have also been exposed to the same thing. So if the connection is made with the soldiers, it's very easy to make the same connection with the people of Iraq. Okay, by 2012, there was actually a list of ailments that was given by Institute of Medicine, saying that these things could be caused by exposure to burn pit exhaust. As you can see, neurological effects, central nervous effects, reproductive effects, cancers. Not surprisingly, these are the conditions that Iraqi physicians have been complaining about and interviewing about, telling the world our population is suffering from these diseases. Since 2005, these are some of my collaborators, Dr. Al-Sabak, all the way to the right, Dr. Samira Al-Ani, Dr. Jawad Al-Ali, and Dr. Rushdie. These are all physicians who are facing immense hard times dealing with cancers and birth defects. American soldiers who have been exposed to pollution have been given compensation for their exposure to toxic compounds. This is a piece of news that shows you that Halliburton actually had to pay $85 million to some American soldiers. More recently, there was in the news, Bloomberg News, and also much more widely read newspapers also reported that KBR and Halliburton found not immune to burn pit lawsuits, which means anybody who thinks they've been exposed to pollution on the U.S. military bases, they can push for and sue Halliburton for their health conditions. Again, another article that says, yes, you can go ahead. Federal court allows burn pit lawsuit to advance. It's a gain for American soldiers to have been able to push for and get this possibility to sue them for exposure. What I'm trying to say is that it's up to us now to show that similar effects could be happening in Iraqi population. It's happening, and that they are also entitled to compensation for the damages that was done to their health. I can skip some of these slides. I will get to the slides that talk about the data we have found. This is a couple of papers we published last couple of years, basically saying that that Iraqi population has been exposed to neurotoxic metals, and it has affected their reproductive history. This is a picture that shows you the reproductive history of a family in Fallujah. Out of the 70 families that we talked to and collected information about, 4 families, there was a husband and 2 wives, which was very important to us because we could look at how healthy reproduction of the family was back in the 80s and then compare it to what's happening in 2003 and afterwards. It's very clear, a man with 2 wives, the first wife having 7 straight kids with no problems, no history of birth defects in either side of the family, and the second wife, 2 normal children. As soon as 2003-4 arrives, she's having children with birth defects. The second one, a very similar story. I will show you one that is really difficult and hard to believe, but it is true. This is a family, again, a man with 2 wives, and the first wife is having normal children. Her 18-year-old daughter in 2010 has a child, and it's abnormal. She herself had the first abnormal child in 2008. The second wife is having abnormal children all the way. So what these graphics tell you is that it is hard to deny that these abrupt rises in birth defects has nothing to do with the bombings and with exposure to these toxic stuff. And now we hear more about it in the American soldiers. We showed also in Fallujah that birth defects have gone up. If my slide comes, I will show you. Birth defects have gone up. Miscarriages have gone up. I'm sorry about these ugly pictures. And we showed that neural tube defects and heart defects are skyrocketing in Iraqi newborns. This is showing you that lead and mercury were significantly high in children with birth defect in Fallujah. I'm going to go through them very quickly. This is the last paper that we've been working on. We have collected samples in a city called Hawija, not very far from Fallujah. It is a very small city with 40,000 people. It was occupied by U.S. soldiers in 2003. They took over a school, and they turned it into a military base. And virtually everybody who lives there is quite close to the military base. And since 2003, doctors have been noticing increases in neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, what are they? It's when children are not quite able to maybe walk, or conditions like cerebral palsy, or, for example, seizures. So a lot of this was coming up, and doctors are helpless. They don't know what's going on. So I told them, well, I can look to see if your children are exposed to metals, the same we did in Fallujah. And so we did, and I'll show you what we found out is, this is a group of children who participate in our study, quite a very poor community, that before this whole mess was doing okay. They were pulling their weight, they were living a quiet life, and now it's an incredibly difficult weight on their shoulders to care for these children. So what did we find? We looked at the hair samples of children, and we saw that titanium and magnesium are incredibly high. Now, why did I pick titanium and magnesium to look at? I picked those because we looked at a whole lot of other metals, but these are very crucial to our study because there's a study that came out of Stony Brook, New York, 3 months ago, which showed that American soldiers who lived on U.S. military bases were exposed. They had bits and pieces of titanium and magnesium in their lung tissue. And of course, they're having multiple problems with their lung and quite sick of it. But what we've been able to do is to show that Iraqi children with neurodevelopmental disorders also have very high levels of titanium in their bodies. This is, again, another bit of data about how children in Hawija have been exposed to multiple toxic metals in their hair samples. This is a study that's coming up. Hopefully we will be able to pinpoint when the children were exposed to metals. This is a picture of teeth teeth samples we collected from Basra, from Lebanon, and from Iran. And what this is showing you is that the areas where it's really dark red, it's deposition of lead. Lead is a terrible, terrible metal, especially exposure of children to it really cripples their development. So this one is from Iraq, and the last one is from Iran. And basically this shows you that exposure of children in Basra to lead is 3 times higher than what you see in Iran, and it's twice as much as what you see in Lebanon. So basically what we're showing is that, yes, toxic metal exposure is quite real. In many tissues we can show it, in many cities we can show it, and we can show it simultaneously with increases in birth defects. And what we have shown is that public exposure to high levels of persistent toxic metals is a reality in Fallujah, Basra, and Hawija. Children exposure to high levels of titanium and magnesium links Iraqi public exposure to the same contaminants found in sick US soldiers. So there is quite a clear connection there. And we know that cumulative multiple exposure to neurotoxic compounds causes developmental disorders, brain damage, birth defects, nervous system defects. So this is basically what we've been able to show. Hopefully we can discuss among ourselves how we can make things change. I have tried to develop this US tour of Iraqi physicians. Hopefully we have gotten an invitation from quite a number of good schools of public health in the United States, including Princeton and Harvard and Boston University and Columbia and Berkeley and UC Santa Barbara. We might be back here again. Trying to bring the voices of these doctors into the United States, hopefully we can create a dialogue or create an atmosphere where different perspectives and different stories will get discussed, and hopefully we can prevent this from happening again. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if it was too long. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Yes.